The city never truly sleeps, but from the 40th floor, it can feel like a silent, shimmering dream. The only light in the master bedroom came from the Chicago skyline, a tapestry of diamonds scattered against velvet black. Ava lay in the center of the king-size bed, the imported silk of her robe cool and liquid against her skin. The quiet was profound, broken only by the distant sigh of traffic 30 stories below. It was a Tuesday. Her husband, Robert, was in Dubai until Friday. A restlessness, a low hum of energy had been building in her all evening. It was a familiar ache, one born of 6 months of polite distance, of hugs that didn't linger, of a shared bed that felt increasingly like separate territory. The lavender oil she'd smoothed on her skin did nothing to calm it. Tonight, the silence felt less like peace and more like a vacuum. With a slow, deliberate breath, she let her head fall back against the pillows. The robe slipped open, the city's glow painting pale gold across her collarbone, her stomach. Her fingers, almost of their own volition, began to trace idle, searching paths over her skin. This was hers. This moment, this release, was a secret pact she made with her own loneliness. Her eyes drifted closed, her breathing shallowing as she sank into the sensation. The building rhythm a private rebellion against the quiet stagnation of her life. The sharp click of the door handle was a gunshot in the silent room. Ava froze. Her eyes flying open, heart slamming against her ribs. It's nothing, she thought wildly, the building settling, the wind. But then came the heavy thud of a duffel bag hitting the polished floor. Liam stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light. He was dressed in gym clothes, his dark hair damp, his chest rising and falling as if he'd run up the stairs. Her stepson, his eyes so like his father's, but softer, younger, locked onto hers, then flicked downward for a split second that stretched into an eternity. A hot wave of mortification crashed over her, followed by a sharper, more confusing jolt. The air turned to glass. Liam's voice cracked the silence. I left my water bottle. A weak, transparent lie. The mini fridge in his room was perpetually stocked. Ava's fingers clutched the silk, pulling it closed with a sharp, jerky motion. Her voice, when it came, was surprisingly steady. Your father's in Dubai until Friday. The words hung there, meaningless and yet heavy with implication. A reminder for him or a shield for herself? He didn't answer. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering. For a heartbeat, she saw something raw and unguarded in his gaze, not just shock, but a heat that mirrored the shameful pulse still throbbing within her. Then he turned on his heel, striding out and pulling the door shut with a soft, definitive click that echoed louder than any slam. Ava remained statue still, the echo of his presence vibrating in the room. The tension in her body hadn't broken. It had mutated, coiling tighter with a new electric charge. She glanced at her reflection in the dark window. Flushed cheeks, wide pupils, parted lips. She didn't see shame staring back. She saw something awakened, something dangerous. For 48 hours, the penthouse became a minefield of silent glances and carefully maintained distance. The air was thick with the unspoken. They moved around each other like planets in a stalled orbit, the gravitational pull between them a constant, unsettling force. On the third night, over takeout containers of Sichuan beef that neither touched, Ava finally broke. The clatter of Liam's bouncing me under the table was driving her mad. She took a slow sip of wine, the bitterness grounding her. We need to address it, she said, her voice calm in the charged quiet. Liam's head snapped up. Address what? He stabbed a dumpling, avoiding her eyes. You've been watching me. Ever since. What are you waiting for me to do? He looked at her then, really looked, and the rawness in his eyes stole her breath. Maybe I am, he said, his voice low and rough. Waiting for you to finish what you started. The admission hung between them, stark and undeniable. Ava's pulse hammered in her throat. She hadn't planned her next words. They simply fell into the space he'd opened. Your father hasn't touched me in 6 months. Liam's expression fractured. He looked away, his jaw working. When he spoke, it was a strained confession torn from the dark. I broke up with Sarah because I kept imagining it was you. The room seemed to shrink. The admission wasn't just a spark. It was a lit match dropped on dry tinder. The heat between them was suddenly a tangible thing, shimmering in the space over the uneaten food. Ava's mind raced, part of her screaming to retreat, to reestablish the boundary. But a larger, lonelier part was leaning into the warmth. Tomorrow, she heard herself say, the words feeling both reckless and inevitable. My room, 10 p.m., we watch. We match the rhythm. Nothing more. Liam's gaze locked onto hers, dark and searching. He didn't argue, didn't push. He simply gave one sharp, decisive nod. The agreement settled over them, heavier than any silence before. The next afternoon, Ava tested the waters. Dressed in cut-off denim shorts and a crop tank top, she moved through the sun-drenched living room with exaggerated care-watering plants, stretching for a high shelf, bending to pick up a fallen pen. She could feel Liam's gaze like a physical touch from where he sat, pretending to study. His textbook hadn't had a page turned in an hour dot in the kitchen. She grabbed a water bottle, taking a long drink and letting a trickle spill down her chin and neck. She gasped softly for effect, dabbing at her skin with a paper towel. You're playing dirty, Liam muttered from the couch. His voice strained. I'm just thirsty, she replied, her tone innocent, her eyes knowing. Later, at the dinner table, her bare foot found his calf under the linen. He froze. Don't, he warned, but it was a plea, not a command. Don't what? She asked softly, her foot tracing a slow, deliberate path upward before retreating. The game was on, and the rules were blurring by the second. That night, at 10, her bedroom was lit only by the glow of the television. The title on the screen, Forbidden's Lessons, Volume 12, made her throat tight. Liam entered, closing the door softly, the distance between them on the bed both vast and infinitesimal. We should, he began. Sit. Watch, she instructed. Her voice not quite steady. The grainy film began. An actress, a confident woman in lace, purred instructions to her on-screen stepson. Let me teach you, she said. Ava's breath hitched. Following an unspoken, insane script, her hands went to the hem of her nightgown. She didn't look at Liam as she removed it, then her lingerie, but she heard his sharp, choked intake of breath. Mirroring the actress, she began, her movement shy at first. The room filled with the sounds from the screen and their own ragged breathing. She dared a glance. Liam's eyes were squeezed shut, his body tense, his own hand moving in a mirrored rhythm. The intimacy was terrifying, more exposing than if they'd touched. When the crescendo came for the actress, Ava followed, a soft cry escaping her lips as her body arched. Beside her, Liam groaned, his own release shuddering through him. The aftermath was a thick, hollow silence. Go to bed, Ava whispered, her voice shaky. He left without a word. Ava sat alone in the flickering light, staring at her own trembling fingers, achingly aware that a line had not just been crossed, but obliterated dot the next morning over coffee. Liam shattered the fragile normalcy. I want to watch you finish tonight, he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. Just you. That wasn't the deal, Ava protested weakly, her cup rattling in its saucer. He licked butter from his thumb, a slow, deliberate gesture that made her stomach flip. Deals change. That evening, the film was called Private Moments. The actress was alone, speaking directly to the camera, her self-love an act of serene ownership. Copy her, Liam demanded, his voice a low vibration in the dark room, or I walk. The ultimatum hung in the air. With trembling hands, Ava obeyed, undressing completely under the weight of his gaze. This was different. This wasn't parallel play. This was a performance for a solitary audience of one. Her skin burned under his stare. As she moved, lost in the vulnerable act, his breathing grew ragged. "Keep going," he urged, his voice thick. When she peaked, it was with his name a sigh on her lips. The sound broke him. He moved in a blur, his mouth capturing hers in a kiss that was all hunger and teeth and desperate heat. There was no more pretense of watching. He dragged her off the couch and toward his bedroom, a silent, mutual surrender. His room was shadowed, lit by the city. The frantic energy from the living room cooled into a palpable, nervous tension. He stood before her, pulling off his shirt. "You sure?" he asked, his voice rough. "Are you?" She breathed back. He answered by closing the distance, pushing her gently onto the bed, his weight a welcome anchor. "I've been sure for weeks," he murmured against her skin. The first time was fast, almost frantic, a collision of pent-up need. The second time was slower, a deep, exploring discovery. His hands learned her body, his whispers painting the dark. "Knew you'd feel this good," he breathed, and the raw wonder in his voice undid her completely. After, tangled in his sheets, the real world began its insistent knock at the door. Guilt, sharp and cold, seeped into the afterglow. "This is complicated," Ava whispered, staring at the ceiling. Liam's arm tightened around her. "Complicated doesn't mean wrong." He turned to face her, his expression serious in the dim light. "We can stop, or—" A faint, confident smile touched his lips. "I can do this all night." It was both a question and a promise. They didn't stop. Asterisk the weeks that followed built a new, secret life within the penthouse's sleek walls. It was a world of stolen mornings, of kisses shared over coffee, of laughter that felt stolen from another, simpler timeline. They established their own fragile rules. This was about now, about need and a shocking, profound connection. No promises about tomorrow. When it ended, it would end cleanly. No hard feelings, asterisk, it was a fantasy and they both knew it. But they clung to its structure. Asterisk one evening, wrapped in one of Liam's shirts. Ava stood at the kitchen island as he made breakfast. The domesticity of the scene was more intimate than anything that had come before. "Was that just a one-time thing?" she asked, voicing the fear that haunted her quieter moments. Asterisk, he turned off the stove and looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "Do you want it to be?" Asterisk, before she could formulate an answer, he crossed to her, lifting her onto the marble countertop, stepping between her parted knees. His hands settled on her hips. "I'm not done with you," he murmured, his voice thick with a possession that thrilled and terrified her. Then he slid to his knees, his mouth finding the most intimate part of her, worshipping her with a selfless intensity that shattered her completely. As she came back to herself, trembling, he rose and kissed her, slow and deep. Asterisk. "This doesn't have to end," he said, his forehead resting against hers. "It goes where we want it to. We don't have to figure it all out now." "Okay," she breathed, the word a surrender to the current pulling them both. They created a fragile equilibrium. They were careful, discreet, living in a bubble of their own making. The outside world, Robert's scheduled calls, his impending return was a distant storm on the horizon. For a time, it was enough. Asterisk, but bubbles are fragile. The tension began to evolve, laced with a new, unspoken yearning. It was in the way Liam would watch her sometimes, a thoughtful, almost pained look in his eyes. It was in the way Ava started to notice the empty spaces in the penthouse that weren't filled by Robert, but by the ghost of the future, a future with Liam that their rules expressly forbade. Asterisk one evening, as they stood wrapped together before the wall of windows, the city a galaxy at their feet, Ava finally voiced the quiet fear. Where does this go, Liam? What happens next? Asterisk, he held her tighter, his lips brushing her temple. It goes wherever we want it to. We don't have to have all the answers tonight. Asterisk, she turned in his arms, searching his face. For the first time, she saw a mirror of her own conflict, the desire to stay in this perfect, secret present, and the terrifying, hopeful pull toward a real, open future. The hook they'd set in each other that first night was now embedded deep, and the line was pulling taut. Asterisk, they stood there, suspended between the sky and the city, between a forbidden past and an uncharted future. Their quiet understanding the only solid ground in a world they had turned upside down. The story wasn't about an ending anymore. It was about the terrifying, exhilarating question of what they would dare to build from the wreckage, and whether their connection, forged in secrecy, could ever survive the light.